We're cued and we're ready. This is Gold and Black Live. If you've tuned in, our first appearance on digital television as well. I think if you are watching us on channel 18.3, you're ahead of the rest of us because that means you know how to get to channel 18.3. So we are welcoming you and glad to have you here. Stacy Clarity, I think we actually have graphics on the show, which is good. Brian Newbert on my far right. I am Alan Karpick. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We have sponsors as part of our show, Gold and Black Live. We meet here every Friday, whether we like it or not. We're here on Friday afternoon, and we actually like it a lot. And we have 3 sponsors that have been involved with the show and a couple new ones coming on board here in the not-too-distant future. But Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big night, stay at HGI tonight. And, of course, Follett's Purdue Bookstore has been doing Purdue merchandise since 1945. Purdue Pride Store is also up by Ross H. Stadium. Our good friend Jeff Julich, very, very proud of his Purdue Pride store, so to speak. And, of course, State Farm Agent Trent Johnson. His phone number, if you want to call him after the show, 497-8585. I think I botched that up. I'm going to look now. I thought I was going to be able to do this without having looking at my notes. 743-9595. Or you can go to trentismyagent.com on the web. All right, guys. We are here for another week of trying to figure out which direction Purdue football is going. You have your opening statement, Ms. Clarity?
I like how we do that opening statement now.
Yeah,
is that
opening
how we're doing
statement. No, what obviously last week disappointing, and,
yes.
and Brian was there in person in the heat, and lost 4 or 5 pounds, I think, in the process. But no, what do you see as now that we've had 5-6 days to digest this thing, and we tend to digest and spit out and look at it again. But what do we see?
I think the tough thing about this week, and I had written some point, I think it maybe in our weekly digital magazine on the Express or on the website, I don't know.
I don't either.
Like it was someplace somewhere
anymore.
That I think that this game is almost kind of a no-win situation in the sense that you would like to be able to come off and have a great week, the next week kind of following up that really disappointing game and kind of come out and show them what you got, but showing SEMO what you got doesn't really show anybody else what you got. So I think that's just kind of an interesting scenario then going into this week. Purdue needs to win by a big margin, and if they don't, that's a disappointment. And, and even if you do win by a big margin, I'm not sure what that shows, but certainly they still have to come out and they need to play well, relative to competition, obviously, but you need to play well. Your defense needs to play much, much better. And so I don't know. It's hard to gauge. That's why it's tough to get this game at this juncture, I guess.
Yeah. We talk about with games like this confidence, how the players can get confidence with a win, how even fans can get confidence that things are headed in the right direction. But with an opponent like this, it's obviously going to be so overmatched, and perhaps the face of the mismatch here is the fact that according to Southeast Missouri State's depth chart, they start at 205-pound defensive end, which is...
Is he cat quick?
To give you, I would hope so, but to give you some perspective on that, that's approximately 15 pounds lighter than Purdue's starting wide receiver, Justin Siller. Anyway, what I was trying to say before I got distracted by the 205-pound defensive end was the fact that we talk so much about confidence, players' confidence, fans' confidence, whoever's confidence, but is it really confidence if you beat a team like this, or is it false confidence? This will not portray reality if Purdue wins big on Saturday, because this isn't Notre Dame, this isn't Wisconsin, this isn't Ohio State, this isn't even Illinois or Minnesota. This is a very overmatched opponent that should provide very little resistance on Saturday. You'd think.
You would think, and I would submit that I agree that the thing I used in my prediction was the word crisp. I don't know why, but it just comes up. Purdue needs to have a performance where it looks like that everything is moving in the right direction, and you're right. Against whom, or against who or whom, win or team or whatever. I think you have to. If Purdue wants to make some steps forward, it'll have to almost be an internal audit to determine whether it did, because the rest of us, it'll be hard to say that no matter how. If it's 70-7 or if it's 43-20, now if it's 24-18, then I think you may have another story altogether. Now, how this show works is that you participate out there, and we ask you to ask questions, and we have a good question from Barry Noble right off the bat, so we might as well get out of it. He says, and mind you that we're we're clairvoyant and we're wise and brilliant all at the same time, but we don't have the answers to a lot of things. But so Barry asked, so if Purdue goes 3-9 this season, which I think Purdue will, does Coach Hope have the same get-out clause of injuries to key players and get another season, or do you think it won't wash this time? And I'll start with that one because I know in a post-game call-in show I got about 9 straight calls on that last week. I think a couple things. Who knows on that front? I think that it has to be. Purdue certainly needs to show improvement, and how that is defined is really not for us to say. And I think it's going to be hard to know what Morgan Burke will look at the end of the year. I think the thing that's important right now, this team still has 10 games to play, and it can control its own destiny. They don't really need to worry about it. Andy Hope's been very public about saying he doesn't really worry about what everybody else thinks. So his team can go out and perform and get the job done. I do think this team has talked about getting to a bowl game. I think that is an important goal for this team this year. And just because it lost to Rice, they still have 10 games to play. And if Danny Hope were sitting here, he'd say we expect to win the last 10. We all know that Purdue will probably be a favorite as it stands right now in 2 games, and actually only in 1 because there is no line on the Southeast Missouri State game. But right now, I would say the only other game that Purdue would be an odds-on favorite, it wouldn't be by a landslide, is Minnesota. Okay, I gave you time to prepare your answer.
I think it's a tough call because, like you said, we're not Morgan Burke, and we don't know what he's really using to gauge whether Danny stays or not. I mean, we look at it as wins and losses, which I think most fans look at it as well, which to me is probably the most important thing. But it's the academics, it's all this other stuff that maybe we don't focus on quite as much. And are they making strides in kind of those areas? How important is that? I mean, also, and it could be a whole show to talk about kind of Purdue's budget and how they manage that money and stuff, and where that money goes, and how should they put more money to football? Should they not put more money to football? I don't know who you can get, and that would be something, like you said, there's still a long season left. The quality of coach you can get here at this point for the money that you want to spend is probably a whole other conversation as well. But I think that if they're healthy this year, which they're already not, so how much does the Rob Henry injury start that kind of, okay, the injury bug question? You're on your number 3 quarterback. I mean, you are. If that allows him to get another year or not. I think he'll be back next season. I do.
Well, I mean, it's week 3.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
That's my point.
It's just kind of the world we live in right now. I'm not saying it's not a fair conversation to have, because it absolutely is. I wrote my whole column on that in the football yearbook before the season, that it is a fair conversation to have. Mm-hmm. Now, that was before Rob Henry got hurt. There are some other mitigating circumstances, but this isn't going to be a week-to-week deal where with every win the scale goes up, with every loss it goes down. It just doesn't work that way. That's not going to be the narrative of the season, or it might be outside the program, but that's just not what's going to be talked a whole lot about over there when ultimately some sort of decision has to be made, and it's going to have to be made after this season because of the contract extension issue. Purdue obviously deferred on that after last season, and now they're to the point now where they're going to be in the crosshairs, where they're either going to have to extend the contract or not extend the contract. If you don't extend the contract, that is going to, speak volumes. But at the same time, is teams do improve. Whether any of us think they will or expect them to, it is still very possible. Mm-hmm. I always go back to Joe Tiller's first game. They lost to Toledo. They got their butt handed to them by Toledo, and then they went 9-3. Teams do get better through the course of time, and it's very possible this team will get better. It was week 2 against Rice. They lost that game, but it's entirely conceivable that they can bounce back during that bye week and be very competitive through the course of the Big Ten season. Obviously, that remains to be seen.
Well, and I think the interesting thing you would hope they're going to get better. I mean, certainly. They need to get better. But how much better can you get considering the competition you're going to play the rest of the year? That's the biggest question. I mean, they definitely could get better, but it may not mean you win.
Right.
When you're playing Wisconsin and Penn State and and Michigan and the kind of the schedule that they have in Ohio State coming up, so you can get better, which is great because that's the goal, but does that improvement lead to actual victories?
Mm-hmm. Circumstance has to be taken into account. I mean, if you go 5-7, something like that, but you're very competitive in the 7 losses, which one of the losses you already have been because it came down to one play. You didn't make the play. But if you lose 6 more games the rest of the season, but you show you can compete with teams that on paper are better than you, that is an indication that things are probably moving in the right direction. Now, if you get blown out by a lot of teams and you're just not competitive, that's another matter. But I think one other thing that we should probably talk about here is we're starting to talk an awful lot about the possibility of a change being made after this season. But you also have to kind of look at it in the sense that it has only been 3 years. And that's a very difficult thing to do for a program like Purdue after 3 years, because then you have to go to the next guy, and the next guy can say, well, if I don't win in 3 years, what's going to happen to me? That's just a really hard thing to do in the coaching marketplace. And, you know, we also have to talk about fairness a little bit, in the sense that is 3 years really enough time to get things going in the direction a new coach wants to get them in? And plus, you know, with the injuries last year, you can almost throw out last season. I mean, you know, as we keep talking about, circumstance has to be taken into account, and so if you throw out last season, really this is only his second year with a full deck, and the deck has already been trimmed a little bit this year.
Yeah, and I think one of the things in this wonderful culture we live in that we tend to jump all over that. It is the topic of the week. I don't think there's any question about what direction this program's going. And I think that's all well and good. But, you know, I couldn't agree more. There are 10 weeks left. This is a team that does have a chance to get better. And Morgan Burke will be our guest in 2 weeks. So I guess, my gut feeling is he's not going to want to talk about that the entire time. But I'm sure he'll address it. And if I know him, not that I know him that well, but I would expect Morgan, if he were sitting here, to say, you know, for God's sake, folks, this is week 3. Yes, it's been disappointing, but let's see what happens with this football team down the road. And Purdue is historically, you know, no evaluations will be made about this program until the season is over, and I think that's the right way to do it. Whether that evaluation means an extension, you know, that could very much be what it is. Danny Hope, you know, one thing that this program has a chance to do is to prove itself on the field. Yes, you can talk about the one strike of not having Rob Henry, but this team does have a chance to prove that to show that it's headed in the direction. The question that none of us can answer and never will be able to answer is, what is that metric? I mean, what is that taken at? I guess we'll keep people talking the rest of the week now, rest of the year. Joe Tiller will be on, is supposed to call in, by the way, at 2:40, and we are going to talk basketball in segment 2 with Mark Monteith, and Brian and Stacy have already started doing their interviews for our basketball preview issue, so we'll hit on that. Norm Blake, a friend of the show, so to speak, always willing to put his name out there, and we appreciate that, Norm. What games do you see us meaning Purdue, winning to get to a bowl game? And I'll start with that. I think, and I'm not a gambler, and I'm wrong more than I'm right, so you can throw out exactly. I think games that Purdue's most likely to win would be, obviously, this weekend, Minnesota, Illinois. I think that Indiana, and that puts you at 5, and then that 6th one is where it gets tough. But I would say that you have, and this sounds crazy, really crazy, but you have a chance at a place like Michigan, because I think Michigan really played well, maybe better than it really could possibly play. And then after that, you know, obviously at home against Iowa would be my next best chance. And I may have missed something. Go ahead. Now it's your turn to be accountable.
No, I agree.
Okay.
I look at those. That's why I think, though, the Rice game was so important.
Yeah.
Because then you don't need to find that other, where can I get the 6th one of the games in the Big Ten that may be a little tougher. You know, like you said, well, maybe Iowa is the 6th one. Iowa's still pretty good. Yeah. You know, I mean, you get them at home, which should help. But if that's the next school the next team we're looking at, like maybe you can get that 6th one against Iowa, that's what makes it a little tough, you know. And even, I mean, the Illinois game, their offense is really good. I think that'll be really interesting too. So I'm not entirely sure where that number 6 comes.
It's just so hard to tell right now, because as I just said, teams do get better.
Right.
So we'll see where Purdue is kind of coming out of that bye week. But the other thing to take into account here is, one thing Purdue has been able to do under Danny Hope is beat somebody it's not supposed to beat. So us talking about this right now is, if we'd had this conversation 2 years ago, we never would have thought they would have beat Ohio State.
Right.
If we had this conversation after the Toledo game last year, after Robert Marv got hurt and Justin Siller got hurt, we never in a million years would have said they would have won at Northwestern, because they were going to run a different offense. We didn't even know that, and they were able to win that game. So one thing you really kind of have to give Hope credit for, and I'm kind of giving Hope a lot of credit for things right now, just to balance things out, because it seems like everybody seems to be against the guy right now. I think for fairness, we need to point some of that stuff out. Is Purdue has been able to win games. It isn't supposed to win. He has been able to get those guys up for games that everybody has told them they're not supposed to win, and they've won those games, and those games have been huge for the program.
Yeah. And one thing's for sure, like I said, we can sit there and say Purdue will have its chance this year to pull some surprises, because, in my estimation, they may be only a favorite in a game or two. Lots of questions on here, and we'll try to get to. Marshall asks, how about the metric of clock game situation management for evaluation? This mismanagement of clock situations has been a recurring theme with this coaching staff. Again, I don't have any idea what that, in terms of his evaluation with Morgan Burke and how that would play into it. It's been disappointing in terms of that it's always a theme, it's always a question, and when you have a game like last week where you have really 5 or 6 situations down the stretch, if Purdue can just run its field goal unit on and kick that field goal, probably some of those questions would go away, if not most. But it still is a theme of this program that I don't know what the coaching staff does as short of just execute flawlessly. That's part of that crisp theme I'm talking about, that I'm the only one talking about it. But that I think becomes important.
I don't think it helps. We're talking about this in the context of Purdue having to make some sort of very difficult decision at some point. I don't think it helps, but it would really hurt if you could prove that it cost you a game. And now, as much as it was talked about after the Rice game for good reason, because it was kind of all over the place, it didn't cost you the game. What cost you the game was the fact that you couldn't kick a 31-yard field goal at the buzzer, which Purdue should make 99.5 times out of 100. The Notre Dame game, the timeout against Notre Dame a couple years ago, did that cost Purdue the game? There's just no way of knowing. Now, if there was any sort of egregious misuse of timeouts or egregious bungling of the clock or something like that you could say for absolute certain cost you a game, then yes, absolutely, that's a nail in the proverbial coffin. But right now, it's just something that doesn't help, because it looks bad and you kind of wonder what's going on sometimes, but it's really kind of hard to hold that against somebody at the end of the day when it hasn't tangibly impacted you.
That was a great answer.
Hand signal on this show. I mean,
that was a great answer.
Yeah, I just think it's unfortunate, and the problem is that until Notre Dame comes into West Lafayette, unfortunately, you're going to have a lot of these questions, and then Purdue will get its chance against a Notre Dame team that will be at best 500, but I think a very capable Notre Dame team, contrary to how they botched the last little bit of the Michigan game, though Michigan, I think, did a great job to win it. My point is that it's just that you're caught in limbo, and that's just the way it is. No one, and we get a lot of questions on it. We get people that think we're too critical, and people that think we're not critical enough, and or people that just what we don't want is people not to care, and we would like people to be interested, and I think there's at least some subject matter to be discussed. Let's go on to another lightning rod subject. Robert Marv. How many sets? This is kind of ridiculous because we're guessing on something we don't. But you guys can talk amongst yourself. But let's.
7.
Robert Marv, how many sets of downs? How many possessions does Robert play tomorrow?
We talked to Gary Nord on Wednesday, and he was asked that question, and he didn't answer.
Okay.
That's a shock, isn't it? I thought for sure he'd come out and say exactly. I still think we don't, like you said, we don't know what they're going to do. To me, Caleb Turbush needs as much time as he can get with this offense, because I don't think he's the problem right now.
Yeah.
I mean, one turnover in 2 games. What else can you ask for from a guy who's making his first couple starts at quarterback? I guess it just depends what their master plan is, kind of down the road. How about how much they want Marv to play? I think best case scenario, you get a big lead and you can put him in kind of in the 4th quarter or whatever. I don't know what they're going to do. Like I said, I just think that Caleb needs time in there to get better against the number ones, or whatever we're calling them. I think they're still number ones for SEMO. But,
yeah.
But so personally, I think that it would be nice to let Caleb kind of really get the bulk of the time, and then kind of let Marv come in toward the end. But that's just my personal opinion.
I think what you want to do with Marv is you want to just get him back into a flow here of playing in games, because if you really want to use him after the bye week, starting with Notre Dame, if you really want to rotate quarterbacks, then it's good to get him out there now, just to kind of get his feet back under him, so to speak, so you're not just throwing him right out there for his first action of the year against Notre Dame. Now, it's going it is going to be really interesting here because they've put weeks of first team time into Caleb Turbush ever since Rob Henry got hurt. And, you know, he obviously isn't lighting the world on fire here, but at the same time, he's done enough positive things. You kind of look at the turnovers. He essentially threw 4 picks against Middle Tennessee. 3 of them were dropped. I think he didn't throw an interception against Rice. He had 1 interception that probably should have been made that was dropped. So that's an improvement right there. You know, as Stacy said, the quarterback's not the problem. So you kind of wonder now if Turbush isn't trending upward into becoming a player Purdue can win with here, just in time to start having some snaps taken away from him here, because they're going to want to get Robert Marv back into the mix. So it's going to be interesting to see how this dynamic kind of works out.
It always is. Well, it isn't always, but it's going to be this time. All right, we're going to take a 2-minute break because we've just dazzled you here in the first 20 minutes. We will have Mark Monteith is down in Indianapolis, but he's going to call on his cell phone and speak with us because Greg Gary is still in Houston making his way back for an important recruiting weekend for Purdue men's basketball. He's supposed to get back by dinner time tonight. They had a flight canceled, so he's not with us. But we'll thank our sponsors again, Hilton Garden Inn, Follett's and Purdue Pride, and of course State Farm agent Trent Johnson. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes on Gold and Black Live.
One team victorious. The story behind the score. The rivalries. The big plays. From the sidelines to you. On the air, online. Are you ready for the frenzy? Friday Night Frenzy. High school football from where you live.
Check out the Purdue collection now at Follett's. Boiler up with Nike Fantastic T-shirts, League and Champion fashion colors. Simply fabulous, simply Follett's. Purdue Pride everywhere on game day. Nike sideline, worn by the team, by the players, and by you. And make every day game day with tailgate toss. Follett's, Purdue Pride, a Purdue tradition, 17 game day locations.
Going to the Purdue game? Stay at Hilton Garden Inn, West Lafayette at the Wabash Landing. Your family will love the well-appointed guest rooms, the pool, whirlpool, fitness center, the breakfast buffet, and the amazing Hilton Garden Inn staff. Located just 4 blocks from Purdue University, Hilton Garden Inn has long been the choice for Purdue fans. Call today for a reservation and make Hilton Garden Inn your #1 choice.
You can now get a quote or buy car insurance 24 hours a day. Call me, State Farm agent Trent Johnson, at 743-9595 and see how much money you can save today.
Need more weather? Chad's blog has storm analysis, weather prediction maps, and current condition details. Stay up to date online at Chad's blog, WLFI.com. Always mobile, always connected.
Dan Klein will have your top stories for the day and keep you up to date. Finish your day with the news you need on News Channel 18 at 11. News from where you live.
Welcome back to Gold and Black Live, segment 2 on Friday afternoon. We always are happy to see Chad go behind the camera as opposed to in front of it. We still give him grief at the time he went in front of it. It was just a flash. So, but Chad still talking about our meteorologist. He's not our meteorologist. He's WLFI's, but he's nice.
Ours, though,
he's
right?
nice enough to grace our
we
digital
can.
magazine every week with his forecast, and now saying, which he's been saying I think all week, low 70s. Be a gorgeous day for Ross State, and there are tickets available for tomorrow's game. So if you're interested in going. Mark Monteith on the line. Of course, our sponsors, Hilton Garden Inn, State Farm agent Trent Johnson, and Follett's Purdue Pride. Mark, are you there?
I am here.
You are, like I said, the last thing we want to call you is a stand-in for Greg Gary, but you're kind of playing that role today, but you do it well. We're glad to have you here, and we've got Stacy and Brian on the line as well. And I guess first question for you is, it's always fun to talk basketball. We talk so much football this time of year, but you spent a lot of time around the Purdue basketball team last year. You're going to spend a lot more this year as well. Early thoughts on what the Boilermakers will bring to the fore this year?
Well, I think it'll be an interesting season. They will be picked around the middle of the conference, 4th, 5th, maybe even lower than that. I do think that they will probably be a better team than widely expected. I think they'll have outstanding senior leadership. Etwan Moore and Juwan Johnson are great guys, really good players, not leaders by nature, pretty quiet guys. You could say they led by example, but sometimes you need some words to go behind it. I think that leadership will come much more naturally to the seniors on the next team. And not just Rob Hummel, but Lewis Jackson and Ryan Smith as well. So I think that'll help. I think there'll be more scoring opportunities for guys. Obviously, last year, Juwan and Etwan had the bulk of the scoring load, so I think that'll be spread around more this year, which is often a good thing if people can rise to the occasion. So, I'm not going to predict a Big Ten championship, but I do think that they will be better than widely expected, and I think that they can finish near the top of the conference, assuming, of course, that they have good health and that type of thing.
Mark, I think you just touched on one of the real themes of the season, senior leadership. I think obviously everybody looks at Robbie Hummel as that guy, but also I don't know if people realize how good a leader Ryan Smith is, how good a leader Lewis Jackson is. You were around practice an awful lot last season, obviously around the team on the road and whatnot. Can you just kind of comment about how those guys kind of carry themselves and how that wears off on everybody else?
Yeah, Brian, I spent quite a bit of time in Decatur, Illinois over the summer, and I've really gotten to know Lou and people around him a lot better since last season ended. And he's a natural. I mean, he's basically an iconic figure in Decatur because of his leadership ability with his high school team. And it really comes naturally to him. He is a naturally enthusiastic guy. He was probably the best leader in the locker room last year, and that kind of emerged as the season went on. I think he was hesitant because he had two great seniors on that team. But as the season went along and it became clear that they really weren't that comfortable speaking out, he did it more and more. He was the guy in the team huddles before they left the locker room for the floor. He was the one who always talked, and he always had something good to say. So I think he'll emerge even more this year in that role. And Ryan Smith's a guy who just always does the right thing. He's a coach's son, and he approaches the game the way a coach would like a player to do that. He's a guy who was, up early every morning this summer working on a shot. He always wants the right thing to be done. He's up for anything that's good for the team. I think he's a guy who would accept almost any role on the team if he thought it was helping the team win. So he may not be quite as vocal as the other guys, but I think he's always going to be up for what's right, and that'll certainly have an effect as well.
Stacey, you talked to Lewis as well this week, and impressions from him, and then any questions from Mark?
Yeah, I've also spent time in Decatur with Lewis, and so I echo what you're saying, Mark. I mean, it really is interesting to kind of see him in his element there. But one thing that I thought was interesting this week that Lewis said was, he's like, go ahead and doubt us, but you're doubting winners. Matt Painter recruits winners, so go ahead and do that if you want to do that. But I'm not sure that that's kind of the right option or whatever. I think these guys have have a lot of confidence. I mean, and they're kind of taking it with, kind of that motivation that nobody thinks we can do it because, Juwan and Etuan aren't around. I mean, Mark, I'm sure you've got a sense of that too, just being around those guys. Those are confident guys, just kind of how they approach everything daily, and they don't mind maybe people saying what they can't do.
Yeah, I think so, Stacey. I think they are confident. They're used to winning. Lewis was on a state title contender in high school, a team that only lost one game his senior year, so he's accustomed to that, and they've been in the program long enough that they're used to winning at Purdue as well. So I really don't think they would ever approach it like, we'll just try to sneak into the tournament, see what happens, that kind of thing. I don't think that would ever be their approach. It's just kind of their nature, as you know, Lewis has had a lot of personal challenges in his life, and he's met those, and he's kind of done that by having a kind of a winning outlook. So I think that'll carry over to basketball as well. So it kind of reminds me of some of Gene Katie's teams that were picked low and wound up, winning the Big Ten or sharing it. And again, I wouldn't predict they'd win the Big Ten. But as I said, I do think they'll finish higher than generally expected. And they just have that kind of team that has the potential to really meld. Now, in order for that to happen, the younger guys have to step up. The Kelsey Barlows and Jerome Johnsons and guys like that will have to take a step forward, which I think they're certainly capable of doing. And they obviously have to find a big man. Somebody's got to be able to hold things down in the middle, and really doesn't matter if they score a lot, but they're going to have to rebound and defend some of the bigger players in the conference. And that's probably the biggest question mark for the team.
Mark Monteith, one of his many hats is the host of his show on 1070 The Fan in Indianapolis, One-on-One with Mark Monteith, an excellent show if you really want to get in depth. I didn't get to hear your show this week on it was George Telefero from the former great Indiana football player and an iconic guy in the state of just all he went through. But you've done some great stories on Joe Tiller and with Rick Mount and many Purdue athletes.
John Wooden.
John Wooden's story as well. You got a chance to talk to John for a long time before his passing. Who on this team, and I know you've already done, I think, a bit with Robbie Hummel, but who else on this team really makes maybe Lewis Jackson is that guy, but who else really intrigues you from a personality standpoint? Is it Kelsey Barlow for you, a guy that's a little enigmatic to be nice, or who is that guy?
I would say Lewis Jackson really has the most interesting personal story. A guy who had a lot of challenges growing up, and a guy who's really, as Stacey knows, a good interview. A very open guy who isn't afraid to tell his story and talk about things that have happened in his childhood. So he'd be a natural for it. But the way I approach it, I think everybody's got a pretty good story to tell. And Kelsey Barlow certainly does. I've spent time with him since the season ended as well, and gotten to know him better. And all these guys, major college athletics is no joke, and it's anybody who gets to that level and has some success has no doubt met some challenges along the way and had some doubters and overcome some things and that sort of thing. I mean, even a guy like Rob Hummel wasn't that highly thought of as a sophomore in high school, and it wasn't until the end of that year and then an AAU competition that he kind of emerged, but he faced a lot of doubters. Ryan Smith, when he announced he was going to Purdue, heard a lot of people back in Toledo saying that he wasn't good enough to play in the Big Ten. And former Big Ten players told Matt Painter they thought he'd made a mistake, that kind of thing. And it's not like, Ryan's an all Big Ten player, but he's certainly a contributing player who any team would like to have. So, all these guys have overcome something in their careers or in their personal lives, and they've worked hard to get where they are. Not everybody's, worked as hard as they possibly could. Everybody has different degrees of devotion to the game, but they've all done well on a bigger scale. So they're all good stories. And by the way, next week's one-on-one is with Katie Douglas, a former Purdue player. She is with the Indiana Fever, and they're in the playoffs. They won last night, so I was hoping they wouldn't be eliminated by the time the show aired on Sunday, and they won't unless they've advanced. Maybe they'll be in the second round already, but Katie Douglas is another person who lost, as you guys know, lost both of her parents, one in high school, one in college to Purdue, and is now one of the better players in the WNBA. So she's up next.
Well, good, and we'll try to remember to pin it to our message boards. Mark and I have a running gag. He sends an email and then I forget. So this time I'll do that maybe for once. A good question from Captain Curious. We'll give you one impossible question to answer, Mark. And Captain Curious writes, I think there have been more than a few things happen of late that Coach Matt Painter has taken the high road. I'm not sure what he means, but Mark, has Crean stoked the fire of Painter behind the scenes?
Has Crean stoked the fire?
That guy that coaches down in Indiana, Tom Crean.
Yeah, has he stoked the fire in Painter behind the scenes?
I told you it was an impossible question.
That's a hard one to answer. I guess he must be referring to recruiting. And he's probably referring to Derek Willis, I would guess. Brian could answer that question better than me. But
I'm not the special guest. All you, Mark.
I don't know. I think there's always a recruiting fire going, and if you're talking specifically about that player, I don't know that Tom Crean had anything to do with him decommitting, but I doubt it. I think there's always going to be that the rivalry between the two schools and some bad feelings between the two schools, but I don't think it's really all that personal between the two that I saw. Last year there wasn't a lot of personal discussion regarding Tom Crean. So. Yes, but as you said, Alan, that's a hard one to answer, especially when it's as vague as it is.
Yeah, Stacy, I've been around Coach Matt Painter, and Brian has a ton over the years. I'll give you my opinion last, but does Matt Painter worry about those kind of things?
I don't think so at all. Do you?
No, I just want to say something about the whole Derek Willis thing. Tom Crean had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
Tom Crean kept recruiting him when he was committed to Purdue. But he didn't reopen his recruitment because of Tom Crean. He opened his recruitment because of two coaches who were much more expensive suits than Tom Crean does. And they happen to reside in Derek Willis's home state. Those were the two. If any one coach or any two coaches or any college coaches in general had anything to do with that, it was John Calipari and Rick Pitino. It wasn't Tom Crean. If that kid couldn't stand the heat of being committed to Purdue and living in the state of Kentucky, you really think he's going to go to Indiana?
Yeah.
That's just not reality.
Yeah.
Regarding decommitment, it's better to find out about a kid's level of commitment now than after he gets on campus.
Yeah.
These guys kind of expose themselves when they do that. And a guy like Derek Willis, a lot of these guys just get bad advice or bad leadership from their parents. And Alan, you mentioned George Taliaferro, my last guest on the radio show. He had a story. He was there were two football leagues when he came out of college, 1949, 8 or 9. And he signed with the All-American Football Conference to play for the Los Angeles Dons. He got a $4,000 signing bonus. And then after that happened, the Chicago Bears made him the first black player drafted into the NFL. And he'd grown up in Gary dreaming of playing for the Bears. And he went to his mom and says, Mom, all you got to do is return this bonus check to him and I can play for the Bears. And she said, well, what did your father always tell you? That a man is no better than his word, And you told this team you'd play for them, and they sent you that money, and that's who you need to play for. And, obviously college coaches wish a lot more high school kids and their parents, would follow that guideline and stick with the word.
All right, on that, Mark, thank you so much for your insight. We will have you on again. We'll see you maybe Monday as well, and send me that email on Katie Douglas. I'll be very interested. You do a great job on that show of bringing out some interesting parts. I always learn something. You think you know everything about John Wooden or Rick Mount, and you learn something new, and you do a great job on the show. We enjoy it very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you up there this fall. So we'll take a couple-minute break. You can send us the bill for the cell phone call too, Mark, if you want. Check will be in the mail. But thanks again. Have a good rest of the weekend, and we'll look forward to talking again soon. Those of you we are expected to have Joe Tiller next for our final segment of Gold and Black Live. So stay put. Watch those commercials and send your questions in, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes on Gold and Black Live.
Just one night. One team victorious. The story behind the score. The rivalries. The big plays. From the sidelines to you. On the air, online. Are you ready for the frenzy? Friday Night Frenzy. high school football from where you live.
Check out the Purdue collection now at Follett's. Boiler up with Nike Fantastic T-shirts. League and champion fashion colors. Simply fabulous. Simply Follett's. Purdue pride everywhere on game day. Nike sideline worn by the team, by the players, and by you. And make every day game day with tailgate toss. Follett's Purdue pride. A Purdue tradition. 17 game day locations.
Going to the Purdue game? Stay at Hilton Garden Inn, West Lafayette at the Wabash Landing. Your family will love the well-appointed guest rooms, the pool, whirlpool, fitness center, the breakfast buffet, and the amazing Hilton Garden Inn staff. Located just 4 blocks from Purdue University, Hilton Garden Inn has long been the choice for Purdue fans. Call today for a reservation and make Hilton Garden Inn your #1 choice.
You can now get a quote or buy car insurance 24 hours a day. Call me, State Farm Agent Trent Johnson, at 743-9595 and see how much money you can save today.
Need more weather? Chad's blog has storm analysis, weather prediction maps, and current condition details. Stay up to date online at Chad's blog, WLFI.com. Always mobile, always connected.
Dan Klein will have your top stories for the day and keep you up to date. Finish your day with the news you need on News Channel 18 at 11. News from where you live.
We're back. Stacy out, Kyle in. Kyle charters.
Me,
and
stuck.
Brian, me, I'm a veg, Danny. You know, that's our first Caddyshack line of the day. We are anxiously waiting for a number of reasons, Joe Tiller to call. We're hoping he is. He is in a meeting with Wayne Larrabee and Coach Danny Hope their usual prep meeting prior to his Big Ten Network broadcast tomorrow for the Purdue Southeast Missouri State. We talked to Joe a couple times, talked to him when he was in the Denver airport waiting to get to Indianapolis last night, didn't get into West Lafayette till about 1 o'clock. And I spoke with him an hour and a half ago. He was actually very pleasant. He wasn't grumpy. I thought he might be grumpy. But our sponsors are always happy to be with us. Kyle's wondering what he's doing here, and that's what's great about that. Hilton Garden in West Lafayette, Wabash Landing. When tomorrow is a big day, State HDI tonight. State Farm agent Trent Johnson. I'm looking at my notes because I spaced it last time. Trent, sorry. But call him at 765-743-9595 or visit Trent on the web at trentismyagent.com. We always talk about Trent heading to the Indiana countryside tonight to do a high school game. He'll be reffing somewhere, I'm sure, and he'll be on the sidelines tomorrow. And, of course, Follett's Purdue store is a game day tradition since 1945. Kyle and myself will be in front of the store tomorrow, the Purdue Pride store, doing countdown to kickoff 9 a.m. on Z96, 90 WAZY. And, of course, Follett's has been the official outfitters of Purdue Athletics. Kyle, what wisdom can you bring to the show here while we wait for Joe?
I don't know. Brian said this was our best show ever, and I was in charge of not ruining it.
I said worst show ever.
Worst best.
Just kidding.
No, it has been good because we've had a lot of topical conversations. We've really talked about certainly some of the questions surrounding Purdue football based on weeks 1 and 2.
Maybe I should tune in.
You should have, but you don't get this. You can't get it on radio. Even though today it's almost been like a radio show because we've had these call-ins. But
no, I'd like to say tomorrow's game will be interesting, but I'm just not sure what we're going to learn one way or the other. I mean, I suppose the only way we're really going to learn something, right, is if it's a close game, I suppose. Even if Purdue blows them out, are they going to be able to solve all their problems in 1 week? I don't think so. Perhaps they can make some progress. I mean, the obvious things we want to see is, some consistency on offense. They played well at times. I'm more interested in seeing what happens defensively. It was nice of Danny Hope to acknowledge, and I don't know how he couldn't have if you've watched the first couple of games, but acknowledge that they have some issues in the middle of their pass defense that need to be addressed, whether those are schematic or personnel. I tend to think they're probably a combination of all of the above, leaning maybe towards the scheme a little bit. But we'll see what they can do. The problem is that, SEMO's not a team that's going to throw deep down the middle of the field, I don't think. So I don't know whether we're going to get a good answer to whether they've made any progress on that front tomorrow.
And Brian, you wrote the opponent preview in the magazine this week in GBI Express. What are your, SEMO self-admitted, or at least people around their program admitted this team is not up to staying with the Big Ten level team, at least on paper, and certainly based on their first their loss to Southern Illinois to start the season. But can there be a scenario where this game is really close tomorrow?
I wouldn't think so. Pretty much any time you play a 1AA, FCS, ESPN, whatever we call it now, team, the larger school is always going to have huge matchup advantages. Now, last year, Southeast Missouri State had a very experienced team. They won 9 games, won the Ohio Valley. Maybe if this were an older, more experienced team coming in here, maybe you would think there's a chance, but I just don't think that's going to be the case. This team lost to Southern Illinois 2 weeks ago, I think 38-10, and I keep going back to the poor 205-pound defensive end.
Yeah.
They start a 205-pound defensive end. That tells you everything you need to know about the matchup problems that SEMO is going to have against Purdue tomorrow. Now, if you're Purdue, one other small point to make here, and we can say this before every game, but you want to come out of this game healthy. You obviously have the bye week to get ready for Notre Dame, but you really don't want to pick up injuries in games like this against opponents you should be able to roll over. Back in, was it 2005, Torrey Williams got hurt against Indiana
2006,
State?
yeah.
2006. Last year, Keith Smith gets hurt against Western Illinois. That had nothing to do with the opponents, but still the fact that you're playing an opponent where you could run the JV out there and probably beat, and you lose one of your best players for the year, that's just kind of especially disheartening. So I'm not saying that there's any reason to believe that might happen tomorrow. You just really, really hope that doesn't happen tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you always do.
205-pound DN, Dennis Kelly. Which would you take? Dennis?
I don't know much about the 205-pound defensive. I'm just basing this on a number.
We've said he's cat quick.
He might be Usain Bolt for all we know.
All right, since Joe Tiller is not here yet, and we're running out of time, Joe, but we are so ready for you if you come. Stacy, our key grip, is off to the side, ready to interject some real humor in this if the coach joins us. But we'll answer one of the questions asked for Joe, just because we can act. Joe's no longer employed at Purdue, so we can act like we're talking for him. But there was a question about the secondary was supposed to be Purdue's strength, and will the receivers we've seen run free in the middle? Is there a schematic fix? Kyle kind of talked about that could close the gap for Purdue, hoping this isn't solely a personnel issue. Looking for a glimmer of hope here. We can't give you much of that because it's not our job to do that. But no, in all seriousness, it's the nickel situation certainly been talked about a lot in the first couple of weeks. But is it come down to? I think it may come down to as much as anything as the pass rush too.
I think we talked about in the preseason the secondary being Purdue's strength in the context of its cornerbacks were really good, and I think that has proven to be the case through the first couple of games. I mean, Purdue's corners really haven't been tested here, either against Middle Tennessee or against Rice. I don't think Ricardo was thrown against by Middle Tennessee, and maybe only 3 times, and he nearly picked off one of those against Rice. So I think the corners have been good. The problem is the safeties and linebackers, whether Purdue's putting them in a bad position or whether they're just not up to snuff in the passing game. I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, and I'm not smart enough, nor do I get paid enough money to try and figure out exactly how you could fix that. But there's definitely an issue there that needs to be solved. Or after this week, when you get to a team like, Notre Dame, will just they'll take advantage of that up and down the field.
Yeah. Well, what's happening right now is, as Kyle mentioned, it's not the corners. The corners are doing fine. They're not even being thrown at most of the time, and that's what's so, I guess, unconventional about this whole issue with Purdue's pass defense really lagging behind. It's been over the middle of the field where the safeties are dropping back, the corners are taking their guys, but then there's this huge tract of land, I guess, between the line of scrimmage and Purdue's deepest man where there's just all this green grass. And Purdue is having its linebackers, its nickelback, whoever, covering receivers coming out of the slot against these spread offenses or the tight end. And a lot of the criticisms being kind of geared toward the linebackers not being able to cover guys in space. Well, that's not what they're designed to do. If you have Joe Holland out there one-on-one against a wide receiver, his coverage might be just fine. But he's a linebacker covering a wide receiver. If the throw's there, the wide receiver catches the ball, what are you going to do? And it's just, I don't know what the answer is, but there's just that huge, I keep using the term soft underbelly there of Purdue's defense. It's the obvious place where there may as well be a sign just saying, throw it here, because there's just all this space opening up.
Purdue does seem to be playing its safeties deeper this year. I don't know if maybe I've just missed something, but last year I distinctly remember Logan Link and at times Albert Evans playing in the box. And maybe I'm just missing it now, but you just don't, to me, seem to see either of those guys up at all, and they're playing deep. And then I think maybe Purdue counted too much on their linebackers being able to cover those guys, and through the first couple of games, it just hasn't worked out.
It hasn't, and yet, again, you think on the road, 24 points, though I know, Purdue's given up 24 now in both games. Would still be, again, you kick that field goal last week and make that happen. Some things change from that standpoint and make it very much at least a different feeling in terms of, because everybody wanted to have Purdue to get to 3-0, and that certainly has had a difficult, it's been problematic, not going to happen now. Here I have a question now, since somebody's commiserating with us that the coaches may not make it to our show today. Time for Basketball asks, since you have a little free time, can you discuss Hammonds, Brian? I've read different things, but not really sure how good he is. Is he a fourth-year starter for us, role player? What can Painter do with him? We're talking about A.J. Hammonds. And Brian, would you enlighten us and tell us definitively what's going to happen?
I think the first thing with A.J. Hammonds is he's a guy, when we ask if he's good enough, he's a guy who changes the game defensively from day one, because he is the largest human being I've ever stood next to in my life. He's, absolutely gigantic. He's immediately an impact shot blocker, immediately an impact rebounder. not only because of his ability to get rebounds, but because of the fact that he eats up the whole lane. And that is gonna allow some other people to get rebounds. So yes, he's a guy who could impact Purdue profoundly if he comes to Purdue. Now, I think when it's all said and done, and I'm expressing an opinion here, I think he will come to Purdue because I think it is important for him to be close to home. It's important for his family for him to be close to home. I think Purdue is his best opportunity, and it just happens to be an hour up the road from where his mom lives. So I do think Purdue will get A.J. Hammonds.
Mark the time.
When, I don't know.
257.
When that'll happen, I don't know. I think he's probably going to take a trip to Purdue maybe next month sometime. Whether he'll sign early or sign late, I don't know. In the summer, he talked about the possibility of signing in the spring. We'll see what happens there. But is he good enough? Yes, he's absolutely good enough. You just do not find guys every day who are 6'11", 7 foot, who weigh 265 pounds with arms that just take up the entire court, just about. I mean, he is gigantic, and he can change a game with his size alone. So yes, he's good enough.
Kyle, you just got back from talking to Dre Mingo, and obviously a inspirational and yet story, but also a very, very talented basketball player for the Purdue women. That around a team that has some high expectations this year. I think it's an important year for Sharon Versa. But we don't want you to tell your whole storyline, but what did Dre have to say, and what's your early impression not just on she, but also on that women's team?
I mean, with Dre, you know, this is a former McDonald's All-American who just really hasn't gotten the opportunity to play a whole season yet. You go to Maryland and play a couple of years where she really doesn't get the playing time that she probably deserved, whether that was a coaching decision or, you know, there were a couple good players that were playing ahead of her too, and then she sets out a transfer year and then gets the sickness last year. And I think it really, this offseason, has made her pretty driven. Just talking to Courtney Moses today also, she said that, you know, Dre just doesn't take a moment off. She's just always focused on getting better. And, you know, if she can get better than what she was at the end of last year when she was back healthy again and averaging almost a double-double during the month of February, I think that's pretty big for Purdue. And they do have high expectations, and, you know, rightfully so. They were playing pretty well at the end of the season. They sort of got a pretty good measuring test against UConn in the second round of the NCAA tournament and found out what it's going to take to get back to where they were, you know, a number of years ago. But they have some personnel, and I think that they're going to take some losses because they have quite a schedule. Probably, excuse me, one of the most difficult non-conference schedules I've ever seen. But, you know, I think when all is said and done, they're going to be back toward the top of the Big Ten.
All right, well, we're in our final minute. The good thing about this, not having Joe today, is we're going to get him with his pot of coffee in Buffalo, Wyoming. He'll just call us up. We know he won't do Skype, but he'll call us. Okay, we know he has a cell phone. So sorry that it didn't work out with Joe today, but sometimes that happens in the world of show business. Brian, quick score for tomorrow. What's the prediction?
I think I said 34-16, something like that. You know, you look at an opponent like this and you expect the Big Ten team to win by 7 touchdowns, but that doesn't necessarily mean, even if you don't, that doesn't mean a game's not a blowout. If there's any moment of uncertainty after halftime, I think that's pretty troubling if you're Purdue.
Kyle?
I'm trying to look up what
I
said 35-14.
Okay, and I said 31-10. Stacy said,
where are you? 40-7.
41-7. So
if I can count her fingers fast enough.
She's going big, or she's going home. All right, we're going home here after this. Hey, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors, Hilton Garden Inn in West Lafayette, of course, State Farm agent Trent Johnson, Purdue's Purdue's bookstores, and Purdue's Game Day store at Purdue Pride. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Hopefully you'll be listening on your way in to countdown to kickoff for the Purdue radio broadcast on 96.5, and we will see you 2 weeks from now, not 1, but 2. Morgan Burke will be our guest, and because Morgan's in town, we know he's going to get here. And we look forward to having Morgan here for probably at least 2/3 of the show, and he's always gracious to come on with us. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you also to Gordon, to Patsy, to Brandon, all our friends at WLFI and all the great work they do to get us on the air. And to those of you watching on digital television, this is our debut, and we're happy to be doing that as well. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks, and look forward to our show on September the 30th on Gold and Black Live.